Hello, White Sox fans, and welcome into another Sunday edition of Sox On Tap. It's Tony Marchese alongside NWI Steve. History repeated, Steve. We once again find ourselves amidst a 14-game losing streak. This is fun, isn't it?
I think we can definitely omit the fun part from Sunday Fun Day here. Things are not great.
Yeah, it's not great, but we do have a show to get to. We're going to talk about this historic losing streak if we think it's going to continue. We're going to talk a little bit about some reports. Steve, you had an excellent article talking about some reports of a former White Sox legend rumored to be a potential managerial replacement for Pedro Grifol. We're going to get to that. We'll talk a little trade deadline stuff as well. Before we get into everything, make sure you're checking out ontapsportsnet.com for all your Chicago sports literature and podcasting needs. Like I said, Steve's got a great article up there today, breaking some of that down. Don't want to spoil it too much, but as we get through this trade deadline here, you can find all of our White Sox coverage over at ontapsportsnet.com. Steven, 14-game losing streak. This is the second time we're talking about it this year. There's been multiple stretches throughout this 2024 schedule that have been bad, very bad. And this is potentially the worst one so far. I know that we are talking about the second 14-game losing streak, but right before we got on here, I wanted to go through the schedule. I'm looking through things, and I know our last win came on Wednesday, July 10th. That was the first of a double header there against Minnesota. You have to go all the way back to July 5th was the last time White Sox fans got to go to bed happy with a win. That's a long, long time. Steven, how does that make you feel?
23 days going to bed upset about this baseball team. It frankly pisses me off quite a bit. You know, there's emotions are a hell of a thing right now. We've talked a lot about just kind of being numb to where this organization is at right now. But still, when you see this level of futility, it does absolutely get the blood boiling. It gets the blood boiling from Chris Getz talking in the winter about how he was different. Boy, you weren't kidding, because no other GM in team history has ever put together a squad that has equaled or set a franchise record for longest losing streaks in the same season, less than 2 months apart. So that's definitely different. So mission accomplished on that. Then you get mad at he who shall remain nameless for making the hire. And, we're coming up on almost a year now when he said that Chris Getz had to be hired because that would ensure a quick turnaround because he knows the organization. We couldn't waste a year tearing things down and having organizational processes change and having new people come in to learn what's right and what's wrong in the organization. We didn't have time for that, but we definitely have time to have multiple 14-game losing streaks in a season. Good thing. Because let me tell you, imagine how bad things would be if Jerry Reinsdorf had to go outside of the organization right now.
Tough.
Oh God, the state of disrepair things would be in right now. Would they be on a 60-game losing streak? Who knows?
It's tough. It's real tough. Steven, I love that you brought up the Jerry Reinsdorf comments on the Getz hire, where we're at right now. I don't want to rehash this for too long. However, it's the most damning statement that's been made just by the actions that have transpired since. This is what I've been mad about since the Getz hire, is that we all knew what this was. The organization will not come out and say what they're doing. There's zero transparency because the actions don't match what we were told as fans. And I think that itself blends in a whole nother layer of why people are pissed off. We could be a bad team. We could have went out this season and told people, from an organizational standpoint, Jerry comes out and says, we're going to tear this thing down. I believe in guts, but it's going to be bumpy for a couple of years. We are going to make moves. We are going to trade fan favorites. We are going to try and rebuild this thing the right way. But they're afraid of that word. And they have been afraid of that word because of what they got themselves into just years ago. I mean, we spent a whole winter talking about this with the rebuild projects. So the fact that they can't even be transparent about what they're doing only lends further credence to the fact that people are going to continuously be pissed off until this team begins to win. And there's no leeway there because I think you even put a tweet out on this. What was said and where we're at right now is two different places from where this was told to people it was going. It pisses me off, quite frankly. Steve, that's all I've got on that situation. It's mind-boggling to me that they can't just be somewhat transparent with what's going on. And that's my biggest gripe this year.
Well, we were also told that this team was going to be better defensively. We were told that they were going to be fundamentally sound. So everything that we were told over the course of the winter has
Pedro Grifol doesn't fucking care if Paul DeJong goes out there and boots 3 balls. He's going to throw him out there tomorrow. Then he goes out in front of the press and says, well, he's going to make errors. That's just going to happen. It's not a fucking winning attitude. I understand the guys are going to make mistakes. Things are going to happen. But the fact that, like, it just feels like you're being gaslighted as a fan.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate way to put this. Getz talked all winter and said that he was going to focus on defense and getting this team to be more athletic, yet we still see first baseman in the outfield and a team that is near the bottom of the league defensively in just about every metric. So the one thing that he identified that he said he was going to focus on over the course of this winter, he has failed at miserably here. At the same time, while putting together probably one of the worst offenses in the history of the sport. How many games in a row is it now that they've scored 4 runs or less? I mean, it's mind-numbing at this point here. So we're not even a year into this whole process with the Chris Getz era. And
the last 4-run game came on July 14th in a 4-9 loss to the Pittsburgh Pirates. And if you want to find another 4 runs, you have to go all the way back to July 8th. So there you have it.
So, for a guy that really did not do a good job in his role as director of player development to be gifted the job in the interest of time, because Jerry Reinsdorf didn't have time to do an exhaustive search, to bring in somebody smart from an outside organization to enact wholesale changes. This is what we're getting here. And I'm really frustrated with this whole thing right now. This thing has gone worse than even I had originally anticipated here. I know over the course of the winter, I was saying a lot that I thought this was going to be a 110 loss team. And I was obviously way off on that number here. So this has gone significantly worse than I anticipated here. And there's really not a whole lot of hope right now. And as we sit here now, we're less than 48 hours from the trade deadline. And I know we're going to dig into this in a couple of minutes. There's not a lot of optimism here that anything of significance is really going to happen here over the course of the next 36 hours or however much time we've got left, for 42 hours, whatever it is. That just makes this whole thing feel so much worse and makes it just the realization that we were sold a bunch of shit. And obviously, I think a lot of us had questions about it, and a lot of us didn't believe what we were being told. But you wanted to hold out some level of hope that maybe things would turn out a little bit differently, and maybe we would see some incremental signs that things were going in the right direction. And right now, there's just, aside from guys pitching well in Double-A Birmingham, what else does this organization have to hang its hat on right now that is going right? Nothing.
Not a whole lot. No, it's you brought up some of the trade deadline stuff, and like you said, we'll get into it. But it's sort of shocking to me, and maybe this is sort of a segue into this, but it's shocking to me that a couple of weeks ago, this organization was looked at the team that could potentially shape the MLB trade deadline, and yet, we're still 48 hours away. There's time for things to happen. But I think that fire is out at this point in time. I don't know about you, just judging from, certain things that we've heard or sort of seen, like there's not even really much smoke. I mean, we had a report from Atlanta that they are discussing with the White Sox, that was per John Heyman, a deal, but Heyman's report had all the same names that are out there that you've heard this whole entire time, and not much substance to it. Normally, when those things start to leak out, if something's seriously taking place, it's a matter of hours, if not minutes, before you see, someone in the national media throw out, a Rosenthal report that says, White Sox finalizing a deal with such and such team. That hasn't happened up until now. I'm sure you've got X up as well, scrolling endlessly, just like I have been for the last, week, waiting for that report to come that the White Sox have made a move. If it happens here, we'll get to discuss that live. But up until now, man, it's been very eerily quiet for the Chicago White Sox.
It has been, and if you look at things, it seems like the two big names that everybody has been talking about, Garrett Crochet and Luis Robert Jr., it just feels like this isn't going to happen. And I think the one guy that Eric Fetty yesterday in the postgame sounded like a guy who was told he's about to be traded. You hear his comments saying that he appreciated the organization taking a chance out of him, bringing him in from Korea, and that he hopes that he made the organization proud. That's not something that a guy would say if he was told, hey, there's just not a deal that's going to materialize here. So I think Fetty is kind of the realization that something is going to happen with him here before the deadline on Tuesday. And then, kind of looks like maybe we'll get something minor. Maybe Michael Kopech will get moved. Now that he's had a couple of decent outings after he started actually listening to Brian Bannister and the rest of the pitching hierarchy about how he should be approaching hitters and not throwing 80% fastballs. Geez, where have I seen that commentary before? I don't know. But the idea that this team is somehow going to revamp their farm system the way a lot of people were talking about a couple of weeks ago, it doesn't look like that is something that will be coming to fruition here.
No, and that's what's kind of scary here, because sure, if we make a deal involving Fetty, if they make a deal involving Kopech, maybe DeYoung, maybe Tommy Pham, we broke all these down last week. Those aren't the guys that are going to bring back major pieces.
I think Fetty could bring back a significant piece.
One, maybe two.
I think he would bring back multiple players, and I think one player of significance.
Fair.
I think that's
it's not going to, but is this going to speed up where that,
no,
where does this move come from? There's a lot of people in the camp of build around Crochet and Luis Robert Jr. I still see those takes out there. I still see people saying these guys need to be moved at whatever cost to try and turn this thing around. It as a White Sox fan right now, Steven, maybe I'm not alone in this. It doesn't look like there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Where does the move come from? Because are they going to player development themselves out of this hole? That's the biggest suspect question on the board. So that's no one believes in that. You're not picking in the top 9 next year.
Mm-hmm.
After the most historical, terrible, just absolutely horrendous season. You don't even get compensated for that in any way, shape, or form. So it's like this team continuously finds a new way to make you feel like you are at the bottom of all of sports.
I talk about it all the time that when you think you're at the lowest point you can be as a Sox fan, there's always room to sink. It's a sad reality that, those of us like myself that have been around and following this team long enough, we understand that.
It breaks you. It breaks
does.
you.
It
breaks
does.
you down slowly. It keeps finding new ways, like I said, to make you feel like you are at the bottom of sports fandoms.
Yeah, I mean, I was at the game Friday night when Drew Thorpe gave up the 8 runs in the first.
Was it better at the ballpark?
It, in fact, was not better at the ballpark. Let me tell you.
Is that confirmed? It's
hashtag
multiple sources.
It's hashtag confirmed. I'm also going to confirm something else. Look, the Drew Thorpe issue. I'm going to put this one on me. I've seen him pitch in person twice this year.
Okay.
I saw him his first outing after the trade in Arizona during spring training. In those 2 outings, he has given up 14 runs in the first inning. So
you're no longer allowed.
So I'm going to tell. I'm going to this one. It's on me, and I will take a hiatus from going to view Drew Thorpe in person. I will do this for the betterment of everybody involved here. Clearly, there's some bad juju there, and we can't allow that to persist. So it's on me, guys.
This is what accountability looks like, folks. This is pure accountability coming from NWI Steve right now, live on these airways. I appreciate it. As a baseball fan, someone who's a little superstitious about these types of things, Steven, I'm glad that you identified this.
I'm not. See, the thing is, I'm not superstitious. I'm just a little stitious.
Okay, that's fair. Just a little stitious. This was early recognition in Drew Thorpe's career. This is good stuff. I'm glad that you've identified this. We'll see if maybe next year there's a way to rectify it. But I think for the rest of the season, man, it's good that you've identified this problem. And
yeah. Like I said, I'm going to take a sabbatical on Thorpe starts for the remainder of the year, and we'll try again in the Cactus League in March, because we all know that's where you hashtag set the tone for the season. And so hopefully we can hashtag set the tone the correct way in the year of our Lord 2025.
Speaking of Drew Thorpe, former White Sox pitcher threw a no-hitter. And that got some extra press because of Drew Thorpe's start in White Sox circles. And again, as I stated just moments ago, this organization finds ways to make you feel just terrible about your choice of being a White Sox fan. That's another one that hit this week. Like, I will fully admit too, man, I left Dylan Cease accidentally on my bench in fantasy baseball. I know how much you love fantasy baseball, Steve.
Big fantasy guy. I really care about your fantasy team, Anthony.
You really do. But just as superstitious stuff goes, while we're on that topic, I don't think he throws that no-hitter if I had him in my lineup. There's absolutely no way.
The likelihood is he probably does not. So, you have to hold yourself accountable.
I am holding myself accountable. We're both holding ourselves accountable for things.
I appreciate that.
I think we've held ourselves more accountable than the entire White Sox organization has all season, just in the last 5 minutes here. Feels good.
I can assure you, Anthony, there is not an accountability issue in the White Sox organization.
You got to change that one up to Sox on Tap. I think we can get that as a soundbite for the show.
I can hashtag confirm that there is not an accountability problem within Sox on Tap.
There we go. That's double confirmed now. I love it, Stephen. I love it. Before we went down this accountability rabbit hole, we were talking about some trade deadline stuff. Let's get to the Garrett Crochet thing, because some people are saying this guy tanked his trade value. Others are happy that this has happened. But Stephen, we heard some reports this week. I'm going to turn it over to you and talk a little bit about what Garrett Crochet is demanding.
So his agency CAA has put out some stipulations that if he were to be traded, that the acquiring team would need to offer him an extension in order for him to pitch in October during the postseason. And this has caused a firestorm of reactions on both sides of the spectrum. Mostly anger, I would say, geared towards Garrett Crochet and the belief that this is going to be detrimental to the Sox and their likelihood of being able to deal him. My personal opinion is I think that in a lot of ways this is being overblown. I think if you look at it from this perspective here, Garrett Crochet is simply trying to do one of the few things that he can do in his position to create a little bit of leverage and help him in terms of guaranteeing future earnings. He's making $800,000 this year. He's going into arbitration for the first time over the course of the winter here. So maybe he gets up to, I don't know, $1.5 million, $2 million bucks. Maybe somewhere around there. You're not going to see this huge arbitration jump. And because of that, subsequently, his following years in arbitration, his salaries are going to be depressed because of being a reliever and some of the injury history that is there. So he's just simply trying to look out to guarantee and try to protect future earnings. And as someone that is a capitalist, as someone that is a believer in the individual trying to make as much money as they possibly can, I don't really have an issue with this here. I think also at the same time, though, he's looking at it from the standpoint of there has been this significant jump in his innings this year. Obviously, we've all talked about it. He's like 55, 60 innings over his previous career high at this point.
Take a look at that in a second. But
it's when you get to that level of increase in innings over a prior career high, there have been studies done that have shown that there is a significant risk of arm injury as a result of that. And because of the fact that Garrett Crochet is already a Tommy John survivor, he's at an increased risk of recurrence. You couple that with the significant uptick in the innings workload, it's not unreasonable for this guy to think that he needs to try to protect future earnings here. If he were to pitch, deep into the month of October with a team like the Phillies, for example, so there has to be a level of protection that the player is trying to take into account for. And I don't have an issue with that. I think also at the same time, though, people are making this out to be a bigger deal because if Dave Dombrowski put together a deal for Garrett Crochet and he walked into that clubhouse for a team that is favored to win the World Series, that has had recent October success, and by all indications, that team, its World Series are bust in the city of brotherly love there. I find it very hard to believe Garrett Crochet would walk into that clubhouse with the likes of Bryce Harper, JT Realmuto, Trey Turner, Alec Boehm, Aaron Nola, Zach Wheeler, and look at those guys and say, hey, guys, it's October 3rd. Hey, I'll see you guys in Clearwater in February. Go get a ring. Make sure that I get a playoff share. I don't see that happening. If it did, that would be really historic. And I think in a lot of ways it would be kind of catastrophic for Crochet and his potential future earnings with any team going forward once he gets out into the open market there. So I think that this whole scenario, how this got communicated was done very poorly by Crochet's agency here. But again, I think a lot of things is at the end of the day, he's just trying to create a level of leverage and potentially maybe try to get himself some dollars up front to protect through this arbitration process any potential injury risk here. I mean, it's really not that different from a lot of situations where guys will get traded. And back when they used to grant like 48 to 72 hour windows for teams to work out an extension with players. Remember those days when that stuff used to happen here? I don't really think this is that different from that. And I don't really recall people being that up in arms when scenarios like that would take place years ago.
Yeah, the one thing that sort of worries me, not worries, but I could just see where this is a little bit of an issue, is the White Sox trying to nickel and dime Garrett Crochet in arbitration. Because we've seen this before, actually, with Lucas Giolito. And now, granted, it seems like there's not really any bad blood, but at the time, this was making a lot of rounds with the Lucas Giolito sort of nickel and diming that took place. What was that, in 2022, I believe? Can you see a scenario, Steve? And I'm trying to look into the crystal ball here a little bit. Can you see a scenario where Garrett Crochet is a headliner in a deal during the winter meetings this offseason before we have to go down that path? Because I'm just curious. You talk about, from Garrett Crochet's camp, you've got this history of them in recent years, and obviously this is Getz and not Kenny and Hahn, but it's still Jerry Reinsdorf. So CAA knows they're not going into this arbitration year and expecting like this easy, clean White Sox are going to turn around and say, hey, look, you were one of the best pitchers in baseball this year. You couldn't really go the distance all year. We had to have you on innings limits. You've got the injury history. They are going to try and nickel and dime him in arbitration, and I fully believe that that's going to be the case. Why would you not want to throw yourself somewhere and maybe shut that? I know he said he values being in the rotation, sticking with the starter role throughout the rest of the year. However, I wonder financially if it would be better for Garrett Crochet to sort of take that bullpen role, go somewhere in the playoffs and perform and give himself that opportunity to work with an actual big league club on his arbitration deal, or maybe get that extension through working for it. I question whether or not that's the right move for Garrett Crochet to stick around with the Chicago White Sox through the end of this season if he does want to make more money in the future. I know where you're coming from. I think that that's all laid out there, and I do agree with a lot of the things that you say. I'm just curious, if it's really that bad here, why not say, like, I can't wait to get the hell out so that you can maybe secure something like that? Obviously, part of him being attractive is the low cost right now. And if you're tossing an extension on top of it, I think that signals to everyone that the league does not believe in Garrett Crochet if no one's willing to go out there and hand him the extension. The only people who seemed to be comfortable even talking to him with that was the Chicago White Sox earlier this year. I believe there was some talk that they were discussing extensions. That has been refuted and gone back and forth. But why not try and take this exit ramp out of the Chicago White Sox organization if you're Garrett Crochet? If we play devil's advocate here, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's just all negotiating tactics, because in his position right now, Crochet really just doesn't have much leverage at all. And I think this is really the only somewhat level of recourse that he has to try to control, like I said, his future earnings and any potential trade destination where it might be. So, I mean, there's just not a whole lot else he can really do right now. He doesn't have no trade protection. Like I said, I think the way that this whole thing has been communicated has not been particularly good. And I think it's going to make Crochet in the eyes of the public look pretty bad for this year.
You look like the athlete that's holding out. I mean, I know you're a huge football guy, Steven, but this is sort of the NFL training camp hold yourself out tactic that he's going with here.
I mean, at the end of the day, like I said earlier, he's trying to protect against future earnings. And I think he has an understanding of the heightened injury risk that is involved here because of the significant uptick in innings workload this year and the previous Tommy John. I don't see anything wrong with him trying to protect that from a long-term perspective here. I know a lot of people want to make this out to be he's, just screwing over the Sox and all of this. I don't know. I just don't see it that way here. But again, at the end of the day, if the right deal comes about, whether it's the Phillies or the Dodgers or whomever it is, I personally just can't envision a guy being in this environment right now, as bad as things are, saying getting to a team like the Phillies or the Dodgers or, the Mariners or a team that has a legitimate chance to potentially win a World Series and just saying, I'm good, guys. You didn't give me an extension. I'm good. Just maybe mail me my playoff share. Just I
It
don't see
would
it.
be a really bold tactic.
It would
And
be
you're gonna look really bad in the public eye.
exactly. And if you do that, it's going to make you look very bad when you go to free agency.
Yeah.
Granted,
So
yes, you'll have a couple of years to try to recoup and try to change some of the public perception about that, but it's just not going to look good. I mean, remember how everybody just completely destroyed Steven Strasburg in 2012 when he came back off of Tommy John, and Scott Boras had the innings limit imposed upon him, and he was shut down and did not pitch in the playoffs. And that was a Scott Boras thing,
yep.
and that was
Strasburg was the original innings limit guy.
right, and that was a stigma that stuck with Steven Strasburg for a long, long time.
I'm
And
going to ask you a question. If you think about Steven Strasburg's career, is that not the most memorable thing that happened in his career?
to me, it's not. To me, I think about the guy in 2010 that came up and was absolutely electric, maybe the most hyped pitching prospect that I had ever seen in my life. And when he came up, just how dominant he was. And then I think about what he did during the 2019 playoffs to pitch the Washington Nationals to a World Series. That's what I think about when I think about Steven Strasburg. I don't think about him being held out in 2012. That's something that comes after some of the real significant accomplishments that he had over the course of his career.
Fair enough. Fair enough. For me, it's the innings limit, because that was one of the first major hyped pitching prospects that you saw go through this, and I think it's perpetuated itself through baseball. And I think that's something that for better or for worse, I kind of think it's for worse in some regards for the fan, not for the player, um, has impacted this game tremendously. Um, I feel like we can thank him for a lot of the modern day uh, ways that teams go about developing pitching, managing pitching workloads, pitch counts, all of that stuff sort of propagated out of Steven Strasburg. So for me, it's that hands down. Obviously, a very dominant pitcher, and I mean, probably outside of Paul Skeens, one of the most hyped pitchers in baseball history as well. But I digress. We're here to talk about the White Sox. Sometimes it's nice to talk about other teams and other players just to pass the time a little bit, Steve. I was watching a couple of other baseball games over the past couple 2-3 weeks, and it's really interesting. And I know you enjoy watching other baseball outside the White Sox, but man, I'll leave one last comment on this. It's so evident when you turn on any other baseball game that doesn't involve the Chicago White Sox just how leaps and bounds better the rest of the league is than the Chicago White Sox. It's crazy. It's really crazy.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I'm gonna say something here. I'm not gonna give away all of the specifics here to the listeners, unfortunately, but you know what I'm referencing here.
Yeah.
I actually had a 30-minute conversation with a player on the White Sox active roster right now, out at a bar in the West Loop Thursday night. And he himself talked about, and this is a guy that has been around the league, and he talked about just the organizational processes here and how behind the White Sox are relative to competitive teams across the league. And it is a top-down issue. Starts at the major league level at the corner of 35th and Shields, and it works its way all the way down to the lowest developmental levels here. And there are issues that somebody that has been around this game for quite a while and seen a lot of things and been on successful teams to comment on that, it confirms a lot of things that we have talked about for a number of years about this organization and just how backwards things are.
It's funny when your darkest fears are confirmed. Yeah, It's an intuition type thing, Steve. And then when your intuition leads you to find the truth, it's always a enlightening moment, but also one that can hurt sometimes. That's true with anything in life. But I know we talked about Garrett Crochet. We've got to talk about another guy that was at the top of a lot of trade talk, and it's probably the worst time for this guy to go into a very, very terrible slump. Um, Not just because it's bad for the White Sox on field performance, but also we talked about that light at the end of the tunnel. And as I do this show, honestly, just for sake of transparency, I'm starting to see why people wanted to trade Garrett Crochet and Luis Robert, not build around them, because we need to figure out a way to get back to relevancy. But Luis Robert, man, it's not great right now. Outside of the stolen bases this month, which is exciting. I like that. I like seeing him running, and please don't hurt yourself in the process of doing so. But it's a sign of a healthy Luis Robert. The fact that he is not hitting the ball at a consistent rate right now is concerning on so many different levels, man. It's really concerning. What are your thoughts on where we stand with probably the most prominent player in a White Sox uniform right now?
This is something that we have unfortunately seen pretty much the entire time that Luis Robert has been here. He's going to go through these periods of time, 2 to 3 weeks, where he is just flailing away at everything. And the strikeouts are piling up at an epic rate right now. And there's not a lot of impactful contact being made. And that's just a byproduct, again, of what I talked about, the organizational processes just being.
Did Jake Berger take the iPitch machine with him to Miami?
Well, if he did, I don't know if he's using it or not, judging by his performance down there, unfortunately. But this is just kind of part of the Luis Robert experience that we have seen, and it's extremely frustrating. Like you said, it's a terrible time for this to happen here, with the idea of him potentially being moved and people believing that they were going to get just this great haul for him. The warts in Luis Robert Jr.'s offensive approach have been on full display here for the month of July. And, if you're a competing GM, if you're the Dodgers, or if you're my Barbs, or another team that is in dire need of outfield help, Dave Dombrowski with the Phillies, are you really going to mortgage a significant part of your future for a guy that goes through these significant downturns right now? So there's the flip side of that, where people could sit there and say, hey, he's in the midst of this awful situation, this toxic environment, this historically bad environment, and it's obviously wearing on him. He's trying to do too much, swinging at everything. You get him out of that environment, you pluck him into a real major league lineup here, and he can go back to being himself and letting his talent show itself on a more consistent basis. But, are you going to, again, risk mortgaging a significant part of your future for that hope that just by merely getting him out of this shitstorm that is the White Sox organization, that all of a sudden things are going to get better, that his plate discipline and his plate approach is going to improve? It doesn't look like it right now, because everything seems to be really quiet on the Luis Robert Jr. front as of right now.
Why is no one screaming for the White Sox hitting coach to be fired at this point? Obviously, we know this is a dumpster fire, right? But is there any other baseball team in history that was this bad that didn't have some sort of sacrificial firing at any point in time? I know this is a new regime that's in here, and Chris Getz, is what? Not even a full year. Where are we? 9 months into Chris Getz. But Pedro Griffol's not firing anybody. I don't think that guy's got any sort of autonomy within his job at this point. There can't be any sort of autonomy. We know that Pedro's not going. We talked about this early in the season. You stated it out there all the reasons why it wasn't going to happen. But it's amazing to me that no one has talked about this. And Mike, you read my mind. Can we talk about how horrific Eloy Jimenez has become? You've watched veteran players regress offensively this year beyond comprehension. Luis Roberts, one of them. I know Yohan Moncada is probably enjoying his time down in Arizona away from whatever shit show this is. But that's another guy that, like, would we just watch him do stuff on Instagram videos and like, oh, he looks healthy, and then I don't want to go down this whole Yohan Moncada rabbit hole, but the fact that there was a report out that said he's cleared healthy, but he's not comfortable enough to play was like the most damning Yohan Moncada thing that you could ever like find out there. That's not getting talked about enough. Eloy Jimenez is borderline unwatchable as a baseball player at this point. I can go through the whole history with the defensive issues and shit that we talked about on this show for years. I screamed at the top of my lungs, make this guy a DH. Just keep him healthy. We can't even do that. You famously said on this show and on X that this could be a guy that, hits 50 home runs? This guy...
You had to go there, didn't you?
He can barely get the ball off the ground. Why is no one screaming for, like, a full change in the, like, hitting from the hitting instructor down to the guy that puts the ball on the fucking tee for these guys in the cage? Well, are we really past like all that? Like, is that the level of apathy that White Sox fans have? Because I think it is.
You think about just the number of hitting coaches that have been here since Eloy has been in a White Sox uniform. To me, it's not on them. To me, it's an Eloy issue. And
that's why he's unmovable.
Well, look, we've got like 50-some games left of the Eloy Jimenez experience and the Yohan Moncada experience because, as Bob talked about in his piece there, that option is going to be declined. They're going to pay him $3 million to disappear and go away. And that day can't come soon enough. I can't
wait for Eloy Jimenez to like join forces with Dion Viciedo over there on the Chunichi Dragons and just light up the world with 500-foot bombs just out of the country. Because you know that something like that's going to happen. I don't think anybody's taking a flyer on Eloy Jimenez at this point.
I don't know. You can maybe see a team like the Rockies, taking a flyer and putting him at DH in the thin air in Colorado. Because I think Charles Blackmon is probably retiring at the end of this year.
Do the Colorado Rockies like get broadcasted nationally so that Eloy's mom can watch?
That's a question that I am not at liberty to answer here, but I think
worried about his fam.
Or who knows? Maybe he's playing in Sacramento with the A's next year. Who knows? But I think there will be some shitty team not named the White Sox that'll take a 1-year $3 million flyer on him in hopes that maybe they can be the organization that can like drill something into his head about not hitting the ball on the ground at a 60% clip. But I just know that the day that press release comes out, that the option has been declined, it's going to be a really good day. And I'm going to celebrate that. When Yohan Moncada's option is declined, I'm going to celebrate that. And when these two guys are no longer parts of this organization, they will be in a better position than they are with them here right now. So it can't come soon enough.
It's amazing that we reached this point in the
truly is.
It's really amazing because I think anybody listening to the show probably followed this team just a couple of years ago. No one has become a new White Sox fan. I think if they measured growth rates of fandoms, I don't think the Sox are picking up any new fans in the last 2 years. So about Eloy Jimenez and Yohan Moncada, but man, the fact that like that was, you take a day off of work to get to the ballpark just to see these guys come up. That's how fucking hyped up they were. And now like they can't be gone soon enough. It's crazy that we made it here. And man, what a wild ride. We've got one last topic to talk about. I don't think you want to continue talking about the misery that is the 2024 White Sox. Let's talk about the potential misery that is the 2025 White Sox. But there was an interesting note today that came out, and I don't know how much of this I believe. Honestly, I don't know how much of it I believe. But we've got a name floating around as a potential Pedro Grifol replacement in 2025. And that name is very beloved by White Sox fans for obvious reasons. And that's AJ Pierzynski. And Steven, you wrote a piece over on OnTapSportsNet.com today that I thought and this is just my full honest review of it, and you haven't heard this before, but I thought that this was fair. This was a fair, honest look at what AJ Pierzynski would bring to the table as a Chicago White Sox manager, the good, the bad, and everything in between. I encourage everyone who's listening to the show to go out and read that. I'm sure opinions are going to differ, but Steven, I thought you took a very fair approach to this. There was some discourse back and forth. Our guy, Besnick, Sox Insane, I've got to give him a shout out for this. He was the one that sort of clipped that and sent it out to White Sox Twitterland. So Besnick, excellent with that. It definitely made the rounds there. I saw AJ Pierzynski was commenting on that under a tweet from friend of the show, Ozzie Guillen Jr. over with what's the name of that show? Blackout Show Shy, I believe on X. So go check those guys out as well too. Steven, I know you laid a lot of this out in your article, and people should go and read that, but we need to discuss this. What are your thoughts here for those that haven't read the article yet?
Okay, I'm going to preface this by saying, and following up on one of your comments that you led into this with, and you said that you don't know how much you believe this rumor. If we learned anything 4 years ago, it's that if Bob mentions someone as a managerial candidate for the White Sox, it shouldn't be taken with just a grain of salt. I remember summarily dismissing his tweet when he mentioned Tony La Russa the day that Ricky Renteria was fired. And lo and behold, look what happened. So we know that, for better or worse, Bob does have a direct conduit to the organization. It's likely the asshole in the owner's box, or maybe it's Brooks Boyer, one of the two. But I think that this has to be taken seriously to an extent.
Do you believe, and I'm just going to interject the question, obviously we're coming up on a very important anniversary for the Chicago White Sox, and you this is coming to me sort of in real time, but you mentioned the name Brooks Boyer, and I can't imagine a way to try and sell tickets that would be better than hiring AJ Pierzynski and getting sort of that band back together for next year, knowing that you're probably not going to be competing, but you want to give people a reason to be here.
Well, yeah, I think especially with it being the 20th anniversary of the 05 championship, to try to garner any kind of fan goodwill, what better way to do that when fan morale is at the lowest it's ever been, I know, in my life, than to bring back one of the most beloved players from that team, and someone that is held very near and dear to the hearts of all White Sox fans. Everybody that was alive, that lived through and got to experience the joy that was October of 2005, has a special place for AJ. And, that's myself included in there. So I wouldn't put it past this organization to try to stoop to a level like that by bringing in a guy that doesn't have any coaching or managerial experience at the major league level. So a couple of the things that I talked about in the piece here is look, it would be an extremely lazy but extremely White Sox move to do it, because of the fact that we all know one of the major prerequisites to get hired by this franchise, as long as Jerry Reinsdorf is controlling things, is to have put on that uniform or have some sort of ties to this organization over the course of the last 40 years. That's a huge requirement right there. So
I mean, Pedro Griffol's the exception to that, right?
right, Pedro, right. I mean, obviously there are going to be some exceptions here and there, but we can say unequivocally that if you ever put that White Sox uniform on at any point in the last 40 years, your chances of getting a job within this organization, regardless of your qualifications, increase drastically as a
Reese
result.
McGuire for bullpen catcher in 5 years.
Okay, it could happen, So that's one thing that will work in AJ's favor right there. And again, it would be just extremely lazy, and it would allow a lot of the narratives about this being an insular mom and pop shop to persist. And frankly, the organization deserves any scorn and any ridicule that they would get for such a hire there for that very reason there. The counterpoint to and then also the other thing too that we know is very important, because he doesn't have managerial experience, he's going to come at a significantly lower price tag than someone like Terry Francona that has been successful and is well revered in the game of baseball here. And we all know managing expenses, big thing for Jerry Reinsdorf, especially as we head into 2025 when payroll is going to be cut. So, we're not going to risk.
Can you imagine Jerry Reinsdorf increasing payroll next season?
Not a fucking chance.
Incredible.
Not a chance in hell. So
again, with the light at the end of the tunnel stuff.
Yeah. So, there's that side of the equation with AJ. The other side of it is this. Everybody that grew up watching AJ play on that team during that era from 2005 through 2012 understands and said in real time as it was happening how much of a cerebral player AJ was, and that he was a guy that understood the game. And there were plenty of people that said at the time that they could almost envision him being a future coach or a future manager in making. He always seemed to find himself in the right place at the right time. Sometimes he was creating controversy as a result of that, but that's just what it was. And it's always talked about that catchers make some of the best managers because of the fact that they are the only person on the field. And Stephen Stone even talks about this on the broadcast pretty regularly. It's the only position on the field where all of the action is in front of you on every single pitch. So you see everything that happens. You are directly and innately involved in every single pitch of a baseball game. No other position on the field can say that. So having that understanding of what it takes to be an everyday position player, but then also having that understanding of how to guide a pitching staff and understanding aspects of pitching and how you need to go about attacking hitters, that is something that does make catchers, I think, very valuable from a managerial perspective here. And while he doesn't have direct experience from a coaching aspect, he's not worked in a front office here, there aren't a lot of guys that have done that. I know we've seen it a little bit more in recent times here. Aaron Boone with the New York Yankees went from the broadcast booth with ESPN directly to the dugout in the Bronx. There's a lot of differing opinions amongst the Yankee fan base about Aaron Boone because he hasn't won the big one with that team. But I think if you look at just the success that he has had there, getting that team to the playoffs numerous times with flawed rosters here, I find it hard to believe that Aaron Boone is not a good manager. Is he the best in the league? I don't know that anybody's going to say that, but that has worked out pretty well. Stephen Vogt in Cleveland, working out pretty well right now. Rocco Baldelli in Minnesota, working out pretty well there. Those are two guys that didn't have experience that came directly into the dugout there. So there is precedent for it. The other thing that I look at, and this is a small thing, and maybe I'm totally overthinking this, it's entirely possible, but with his show that he has on YouTube with Foul Territory, he has the opportunity and he has had the ability to have direct interaction and direct conversations with former and current players in the game right now, all across the game, executives, scouts. He's gotten a sense, and I'm sure he's had, conversations off the record about the state of the game, the state of particular organizations, some things that they are trying to do. So he might actually be able to bring a fresh, different perspective on what is happening outside the game instead of just looking at things from this micro White Sox view, he could look at things from a macro perspective here and say, these are some of the things that in the conversations I've had with people from XYZ organization that they are doing that is leading to success. This is where you are behind the curve across the rest of the league. We saw also at the same time when Chris Getz was on the show, he took Getz to task. He has taken the White Sox organization to task for being behind the eight ball on a number of things, for not being forward thinking. He took Jerry Reinsdorf to task for not going out and acquiring high level talent there. So is he going to be a yes man and somebody that's just going to follow the organizational bullshit? You would think not. Now, the last conversation on the last interview spot that he did with a friend of the show, White Sox David, over at Barstool, he made some complimentary remarks about Jerry. It almost makes you wonder, has this thing been set in motion a little bit? And he was given that directive of, hey, you need to kind of walk back some of the harsh criticisms that you had recently here. So it kind of gets the wheels turning here if we want to put the tinfoil hat on here.
Tinfoil hat time's always
we're always a fun time. We're always for tinfoil hat time here. So I just think that him being able to look at things, like I said, from that 10,000 foot view, maybe he can bring some perspective to this organization. Maybe he can say to Jerry, look, I was here when things were good. You're behind the rest of the league in these areas here. I've had these conversations because he has that gravitas as a player that won a fucking ring here. He was part of that fucking parade. That matters. And I think that maybe that could give him and his opinion a little bit more weight in that room versus a fucking schlub like Pedro Grifol.
Well, we've seen this move before. That was the Tony La Russa hire, a guy that has Jerry's ear, right? I mean, obviously, it's been spoken about by AJ himself that, still talks to Jerry. There was obviously some bad blood that spilled at some point with his statements earlier this year on Foul Territory about no longer working for the White Sox as an ambassador. You do bring up a great point that there were some things that were walked back a little bit from a public perspective on that show as well. It's interesting when you do put on that tinfoil hat here, Stephen, and you brought up a great point that I wasn't thinking about with Bob Nightingale and the TLR tweets that were put out there before that hire. I still have a hard time believing that AJ Pierzynski could potentially be a guy that's in the dugout for this team next year. That said, I think that's, maybe that's the closest you get to that Ozzie Guillen type blood in the dugout with a guy that understands what it is to be part of the Chicago White Sox. We've heard all of the rhetoric from Pedro Grifol about, I want to respect this uniform, get out there. I think AJ's messaging to these guys would be a little bit different. Now, a lot of people won't like this, but I do enjoy hires that respect what it is to be someone on the Chicago White Sox. I loved Ozzie Guillen for that. That's just my personal opinion. I mean, you used the word lazy hire. What do you part of me says, what do you have to lose here with an AJ Pierzynski hire? You don't have anything to lose, and you have a lot to gain. I think he's a guy that can go back and do Foul Territory, go back into a broadcast booth if it doesn't work out. The only person who stands to lose from that transaction is AJ Pierzynski himself in White Sox fans' minds, because you're the king of Robin Ventura wasn't respected enough as a player because of his managerial tenure here with the Chicago White Sox. The only person, in my opinion, who has something to lose here is AJ Pierzynski.
And I think that's a very valid point. I was going to draw the parallel there to Robin, who was one of the most revered players of my youth. And still to this day, bring Robin home. You fuckers, do the right thing. Pissing me off with this shit. Anyway, but that's, one of the concerns that you would have to have is, would that tarnish AJ's legacy within this fan base here if he comes into a situation where, again, we know that this thing is going to be bad for the next 2 years. Does he want to have that on his name and on his resume and as part of his reputation within this fan base and with this organization? And I mean, we have not seen Robin Ventura since the last day of the 2016 season. He's been nowhere to be found for almost a decade, and it's bullshit. It pisses me off. And you have to wonder, would that happen to AJ again? Because we know he would be coming into a terrible, terrible situation here. Mm-hmm. At the same time, though, like you said, there's not really a whole lot for the organization to lose, because if you take a chance on a guy that doesn't have the experience with a team that is probably, well, not probably, that will lose 100 games again next year, and if you have inexperienced managerial mistakes that come as a result of it, it's not really harming you in any way there. So if you do it for 2 years, if he decides he wants to do it and it doesn't go well, you wash your hands of the situation. We know it's only going to be a 3-year deal anyway, because that's the way the White Sox do business with their managers. Yeah, you got your standard boilerplate 3-year deal there. So if it doesn't work for 2 years, and if after the 26th season there's a little bit of light at the end of this tunnel here, well, then maybe at that point you go and you try to bring on an experienced manager to try to guide this team if they're on the right track here. But if they're not, you haven't really lost anything, to be completely honest. So I want to be clear. AJ's not the guy that I would hire if it were me making the decision there.
Would you be okay with it? Not that he's your guy that you would hire in this situation, but would you welcome AJ Pierzynski as manager of the Chicago White Sox?
I would want to hear more from him about his philosophy and his approach and how he would plan to attack this thing. I haven't listened to a ton of Foul Territory, honestly, but between that and his work in the booth nationally for Fox, he's not said anything that offends my baseball sensibility. He's not said anything that is an automatic disqualifier in my baseball world from a philosophical standpoint. So I don't have any issues with there being a further discussion about it. Because
is some of the distrust just in Chris Getz and Jerry Reinsdorf?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's
and I
just trying to get to your thought process.
There's so much angst within the fan base about this just being a lazy White Sox move. Just, we got to hire somebody from within the family to fill this role here. So there is going to be part of that. But again, and the thing that I closed out my piece with, the last time they interviewed somebody for the job, when everybody thought Cito Gaston, who had won 2 World Series with the Toronto Blue Jays, breaking my fucking heart in 1993 when I was 9 years old, everybody thought Cito Gaston was going to be the guy that Kenny was going to hire going into the 2004 season after Jerry Manuel got fired. And then a former White Sox player went in there and blew the fucking doors off in the interview. And the rest was history, as they say. Who knows? Maybe it could happen again. You never know.
Well, if there's someone that tries to find lightning striking twice in the same place, it's Jerry Reinsdorf. I'm pretty sure that's the case. Steven, this was an excellent show. We had an excellent crowd tonight. Thank you for everybody that tuned in here at Sox On Tap. Man, I'll close out with some final statements that were stuff I said earlier. This organization just continues to find ways to make you feel bad about being a Chicago White Sox fan. I'll tie that into this AJ Pierzynski thing. Personally, I think that this would go, I know people want to call it lazy. It would probably get me more excited to watch, White Sox baseball from the standpoint of a fan, because I want to tune in and hear what AJ Pierzynski says after the game. I don't think he'd be a guy that's afraid to hold back in some of these post-game interviews. That said, I feel like it's almost like a year too late for that hire, because I would rather, from an entertainment standpoint, and to get on this show and talk about stuff, I would love to hear him talk to Ozzie Guillen and Chuck Garfien and talk about what the fuck's going on with Eloy Jimenez. I think it'd be hilarious. It'd be great entertainment. I think they need somebody in there of his ilk that's not going to be afraid to call out some of the bullshit that's happening within this organization. And I think he's the type of guy that has at least some respect from Jerry Reinsdorf. Obviously, he's gotten under his skin enough to get, I don't know if he was fired.
For daring to speak the truth.
Right. There needs to be a truth sayer. And that's what I started this whole show with was I just want someone in this organization to tell fans the truth about what's going on with the team. And so for that, to me, as a White Sox fan, I think would be a little bit of a breath of fresh air, just knowing what his track record is. I think he can speak to the fans a lot better than Pedro Grifol can, a lot better than Chris Getz can. And this team needs a spokesperson so desperately that can communicate with people from inside the organization, and they don't have it right now. I think that's part of the reason for the disconnect. Is his resume stacked up enough against some of the other candidates that are out there that might be able to do the same thing? Probably not. But at least to me, it's not someone that would be Pedro Grifol at this point. Like if they go out and if they replace Pedro Grifol with someone else that has zero credentials, no ties to the organization, and I would consider that an even lazier hire just from where I sit. Like, I don't want another Pedro Grifol at that point. At least with AJ Przinsky, there's some sort of connection to the fans. And obviously with foul territory and everything he's done media-wise, it's, he's a controversial guy, still the same way that he was on the field. And I think if they're looking to shake things up a little bit, it's an interesting name that's being floated around there.
You know what I would really like to see? I'd really like to see this team get back to the days when I don't have to listen to and really give a shit about what is being said in the post-game press conference because they just put another fucking number in the left-hand column. That's what I want.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. You're not wrong, Steven. Again, thank you to everybody who tuned in tonight. That's another edition of the Sox on Tap podcast. Steve, any final thoughts?
Final thoughts. We're on the precipice of history. Hopefully it doesn't happen. That's all I got.
Tomorrow will be interesting. I don't want to preview much of what's going to happen next. Last time we ended the show, we talked about were there wins on the schedule. We said no. I think we're both in that same camp right now. So that's our preview for the next week. We'll be back with some trade deadline coverage, talk about what happened. Be sure you're checking out ontapsportsnet.com for all of our updates on the Chicago White Sox. Steven, close it down how we always do. White Sox forever.
White Sox for life.